The conclave of 10,000 stars had never known defeat. For 17 million years, the great alliance of civilizations had spread across the galaxy like a tide of inevitability. They had absorbed 300,000 sentient species into their fold. They had dismantled empires that spanned entire galactic arms. They had harvested the energy of dying stars and bent the fabric of space-time to their will. High Arbiter Xinthox stood upon the observation deck of the Eternal Judgment, the greatest vessel ever constructed by thinking minds. At 47 kilometers in length, it was a city, a weapon, and a statement of absolute dominion combined into one impossible machine. Behind it, stretching across 3 light hours of space, came the Pacification Fleet, 100 million vessels carrying representatives and warriors from every major species in the conclave. This was not a fleet. This was a civilization in motion. "We approach the boundary," announced Fleet Commander Vexari, her iridescent scales rippling with anticipation. She was Kethra, one of the conclave's founding species, and she had personally overseen the subjugation of 600 worlds. The target system lies ahead. Sol, they call it. Xinthox's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. He was ancient, even by the standards of his long-lived species, having witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 minor empires. In all his centuries, he had never encountered a species quite like the one that awaited them. Humans. Such a simple name for such a troublesome creature. "Remind me again," Xinthox said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "why we have committed such resources to this endeavor. 1 species, 1 system, 8 planets orbiting an unremarkable yellow star." Vexari's tactical display flickered to life, projecting a holographic representation of human space. It was laughably small, a tiny bubble of influence centered on their homeworld, with a handful of colony ships crawling toward distant stars at sublight speeds. They had not yet mastered faster-than-light travel. They had not yet encountered other civilizations. By all rights, they should have been a trivial matter. "The observers have been watching them for 3 of their centuries," Vexari explained. "Initially, they were classified as pre-emergence primitives. Tool users, yes, but confined to their birth world and showing no signs of advancement beyond chemical propulsion. And yet? And yet they have proven anomalous." Vexari's scales darkened, a sign of uncertainty. In the span of 300 years, they have progressed from simple combustion engines to nuclear fission, quantum computing, and rudimentary antimatter containment. They have placed permanent settlements on their moon and their neighboring planet. They have sent probes beyond their star's influence. Xinthox waved a dismissive appendage. "Rapid development is not unprecedented. The Kaleshi achieved spaceflight within 4 generations of discovering metallurgy. They still fell to us." "The Kaleshi were collaborative," Vexari countered. "The humans are not. They have spent the majority of their recorded history in conflict with one another. They have developed weapons capable of rendering their own world uninhabitable, and they have chosen not to use them. They fight constantly, and yet they persist. They die by the billions, and yet they multiply. They are divided into thousands of competing factions, and yet they advance as a species." "Contradictions," Xinthox observed. "They sound like chaos incarnate." "They are, and that is precisely why the conclave voted for immediate pacification." Vexari gestured toward the vast fleet behind them. The humans have been observed for 3 centuries. In that time, no fewer than 17 conclave vessels have entered their system on reconnaissance missions. And none returned. Silence fell across the observation deck. Xinthox's compound eyes narrowed. 17 vessels, he repeated. Lost to a species that has not yet achieved interstellar travel? Correct. The last vessel to attempt contact was the Whispered Truth, a Velcorian stealth cruiser with the most advanced cloaking technology in the Conclave. It entered the Sol system 4 of their years ago with orders to establish a hidden observation post on the 6th planet. It transmitted for 11 days, then nothing. What were its final transmissions? Vexari hesitated. This was unlike her. She was a veteran of countless campaigns, a commander who had ordered the extinction of species without flinching. But something in those final transmissions had shaken even her iron composure. The crew reported anomalies, she said carefully, equipment malfunctions that defied explanation, navigation systems that insisted they were thousands of light years from their actual position, crew members who swore they heard voices in empty corridors. And in the final transmission, just before contact was lost, the captain said something that the linguistic analysts have struggled to interpret. Which was? They know we're here. They've always known. And they're not afraid. They're waiting. Xinthox processed this information with the cold logic of a being who had lived through eons of conflict. He had faced enemies who could consume stars, species that existed as pure thought, civilizations that had transcended physical form entirely. None of them had frightened him. But something about the captain's final words sent an unfamiliar sensation crawling through his ancient neural pathways. "Increase fleet density," he ordered. "All vessels to combat formation. We will approach the system as a unified force, not as scouts. If these humans wish to wait for us, then we shall not disappoint them." The Sol system grew larger in the observation displays as the pacification fleet decelerated from superluminal velocity. Xinthox watched with the patience of immortality as the yellow star resolved from a point of light into a burning sphere of plasma, its planets becoming visible as distinct bodies rather than abstract data points. It was, he had to admit, a rather beautiful system. The humans had been fortunate in their cosmic lottery. Their world orbited at precisely the right distance from their star to permit liquid water, and they were shielded by gas giants that swept away incoming debris. Evolution had been kind to them. That kindness was about to end. "Fleet status," Vexari reported. "All vessels in position. 100 million ships await your command, High Arbiter. The Conclave's might stands ready." Xinthox surveyed the formation with satisfaction. This was overkill on a scale that bordered on the absurd. The humans possessed perhaps 10,000 spacecraft, most of them small and designed for cargo transport rather than combat. Their military vessels were primitive, chemical rockets and kinetic weapons, with a handful of experimental laser platforms orbiting their homeworld. Against the pacification fleet, they were insects facing a hurricane. And yet, "Deploy the observers," Xinthox commanded. "I want eyes on every planet, every moon, every significant asteroid. I want to know where their ships are, where their populations are concentrated, and what weapons they possess. Leave nothing to chance." The observer swarm launched, billions of microscopic drones spreading out across the system like a plague of mechanical locusts. They were effectively invisible, designed to evade any detection technology the Conclave had encountered. Within hours, they would provide a complete tactical picture of human civilization. Xinthox settled in to wait. After 17 million years, the Conclave had learned the value of patience. The first reports began arriving 6 hours later. "High Arbiter," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving observer data from the outer system. The gas giants appear uninhabited, as expected. We're detecting several human probes and research stations, but no significant military presence." Continue. The asteroid belt shows scattered mining operations. Approximately 4,000 human vessels, mostly automated. Their fourth planet hosts 3 small colonies with a combined population of roughly 50,000. No orbital defenses detected.
And their homeworld?
The communications officer hesitated. "Still gathering data, High Arbiter. The observer swarm has encountered difficulties." Explain. Approximately 40% of the observers have ceased transmitting since entering the inner system. We initially assumed equipment failure, but the loss pattern is not random. It's as if they're being intercepted. Xinthox felt that unfamiliar sensation again, that crawling uncertainty that he refused to name as fear. "Intercepted by what?" "Unknown, High Arbiter. We have no data on the mechanism. The observers simply stop transmitting. No distress signals, no final bursts, nothing. They just go silent." Commander Vexari stepped forward, her scales now a deep crimson, the color of war readiness. "We should not underestimate these creatures. I recommend we proceed with the bombardment protocols. Eliminate their capacity for resistance before they can mount any defense." Xinthox considered this. Standard Conclave doctrine called for initial communication, an offer of integration, followed by demonstrations of overwhelming force. It was more efficient to absorb a species willingly than to exterminate them. Extinction was wasteful. But the humans had already destroyed 17 Conclave vessels without possessing any visible capability to do so. Perhaps efficiency was not the priority here. "Agreed," Xinthox decided. "Fleet Commander, target their orbital infrastructure. Destroy their satellites, their space stations, their ships. Blind them and cripple them. Then we will offer terms." "With pleasure, High Arbiter." The order cascaded through the fleet. 100 million vessels oriented themselves toward the distant blue marble that the humans called Earth. Energy weapons charged, missile tubes loaded, and reality-warping engines prepared to tear the fabric of space-time itself. The conclave of 10,000 stars had arrived. And they had come for everything. The bombardment began at 0600 Coordinated Universal Time, though the humans had no way of knowing it for another 8 minutes, the time it took for light to travel from Mars' orbit to Earth. The first wave consisted of kinetic projectiles accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. At such velocities, even small masses carried the energy of nuclear weapons. 2,000 of them streaked toward Earth's orbital infrastructure, targeting communication satellites, GPS networks, and the handful of military platforms that humanity had managed to deploy. They never arrived. On the bridge of the Eternal Judgment, tactical displays erupted with impossible data. The kinetic projectiles, each one a masterwork of conclave engineering, guided by quantum computers and shielded against any known interference, simply vanished. Not destroyed, not deflected, vanished. "Report!" Xinthox demanded, his mandibles clacking with agitation. "The projectiles are gone, High Arbiter," the tactical officer stammered. "All 2,000 of them. Our sensors can't locate them anywhere in the system." "That's not possible. Kinetic projectiles cannot be destroyed without releasing energy. Where is the debris? Where are the radiation signatures?" "There are none, High Arbiter. It's as if they never existed." Vexari's scales had shifted to a sickly pale color, the shade of mortal dread among her species. "Launch the second wave. Energy weapons this time. Let's see them make those disappear." The second wave was light itself, concentrated beams of coherent radiation capable of vaporizing continents. 10,000 capital ships fired simultaneously, painting the void with enough energy to power the Conclave civilization for a century. The beams traveled for approximately 3 seconds before they curved. Not dispersed, not reflected. Curved. Like water flowing around a stone, the concentrated light of 10,000 warships bent around the Earth, looped back on itself, and dissipated harmlessly into space. The energy hadn't been absorbed, it had been redirected by something that the Conclave's instruments could not detect. "This is impossible," Vexari whispered. "Light does not bend without mass. There's nothing there. Our sensors show nothing." "Your sensors are wrong," Xinthox said grimly. "Something is there. Something is protecting them." A new signal appeared on the communication arrays. It was primitive by Conclave standards, simple electromagnetic radiation modulated to carry information. The kind of technology that the Conclave's ancestors had used before they had transcended such limitations. But the signal was clear, and it was directed specifically at the eternal judgment. "We're being hailed," the communications officer said, his voice trembling. It's coming from Earth." "Put it through." The holographic display flickered, and a human appeared. It was the first time any member of the current fleet had seen one of these creatures in real time, and despite the tension of the moment, Xinthox found himself studying it with clinical interest. It was smaller than he had expected, barely 2 meters tall, with a bipedal frame and a face dominated by forward-facing eyes. Its skin was a pinkish-brown shade, and it wore some kind of formal garment that covered most of its body. Behind it, Xinthox could see hints of a large chamber filled with other humans, all watching the communication with expressions that he could not interpret. "I am Secretary General Amara Okonjo of the United Nations," the human said. Its voice was translated in real time by the Conclave's linguistic algorithms, but something about the tone carried through, a calmness that bordered on the unsettling. "I speak for humanity. We have been expecting you." Xinthox's compound eyes narrowed. "You have been expecting us? How is that possible?" "We've been watching your observers for months," Okonjo replied. "Interesting technology. A bit obvious once you know what to look for, but interesting nonetheless. We've also been monitoring your fleet's approach for the past several days. You're not exactly subtle, you know. 100 million ships tends to leave a mark on the local space-time. If you knew we were coming, why did you not flee? Why did you not prepare defenses?" Okonjo smiled. It was a strange expression, a baring of teeth that in most species would indicate aggression, but which humans apparently use to convey amusement or welcome. "Who says we didn't prepare?" "We have observed no military buildup. Your species possesses no technology capable of threatening our fleet. You cannot even travel faster than light. By any objective measure, you are helpless before us." Objective measures can be deceiving, High Arbiter Zinethox. Zinethox started. He had not given his name. He had not transmitted any identifying information. And yet this human spoke it as casually as if they were old acquaintances. "How do you know my name?" "We know quite a lot about you," Okonjo said. "About your fleet, about the Conclave, about everything that's happened in this galaxy for the past few million years. We've had time to study." "That is not possible. Your species has existed for mere hundreds of thousands of years. Your technological civilization is less than 10 millennia old." "Those are the numbers you're familiar with, yes." Okonjo's smile faded, replaced by something more serious. "But you've been operating on some incomplete assumptions, High Arbiter. You see, your observers have been watching us for 3 centuries, recording our development, tracking our progress, reporting back to the Conclave. And all that time, they've been telling you exactly what we wanted them to see." A cold sensation spread through Zinethox's neural pathways. "You're saying you manipulated our intelligence gathering? That the data we've collected is false?" "Not false. Carefully curated. We showed you what you expected to see. Primitive apes taking their first stumbling steps into the cosmos. We let you believe you were dealing with children." Okonjo leaned forward, and something changed in her expression. The calm professionalism dropped away, replaced by something older and harder, something that had no business being on the face of a species so young. "We are not children, High Arbiter. We have never been children. And this conversation is a courtesy that we extend only once." "A courtesy?" "We are giving you the opportunity to leave. Take your fleet, return to the Conclave, and never enter Sol's system again. If you do this, no harm will come to you. If you refuse—" Okonjo paused, and Zinethox could swear he saw something flicker in the depths of her eyes, something vast and ancient and terrible. "If you refuse, you will learn why none of your ships have ever returned from this system. You will learn what humanity truly is." Zinethox had faced threats before. He had been warned by dying empires and cornered civilizations and entities that transcended mortal comprehension. None of them had shaken him. None of them had made him reconsider. But something about this human, this small, fragile, impossibly calm creature, sent a shiver through his ancient bones. For a long moment, he considered her offer. A tactical retreat was not dishonorable. The Conclave would regroup, gather more intelligence, return with even greater force. There was wisdom in caution. But the Conclave of 10,000 stars had not conquered the galaxy through caution. They had conquered it through overwhelming force and unwavering resolve. To retreat before a species that had not even achieved interstellar travel would be to admit weakness, and weakness, in the Conclave's calculus, was extinction. "Your offer is rejected," Zinethox said. "You have had your warning. Now you will have your demonstration." He gestured to Vexari, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease. "Fleet Commander, advance to optimal bombardment range. All weapons free. Leave nothing alive on that planet." Okonjo watched him with those strange, forward-facing eyes. There was no fear in her expression, no anger, no desperation, just a profound and terrible sadness. "Very well," she said softly. "We tried." The transmission ended. The pacification fleet moved forward, 100 million vessels advancing in perfect formation. Behind them, the outer planets of Sol system grew smaller. Ahead, the blue and white jewel of Earth grew larger with each passing hour. Commander Vexery coordinated the approach from the tactical center of the Eternal Judgment, surrounded by holographic displays showing the status of every ship in the fleet. It was a masterwork of military precision, a killing machine honed by millions of years of conquest. And yet, something was wrong. High Arbiter, Vexery reported, her voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. We're experiencing system malfunctions across the fleet. What kind of malfunctions? Navigation, primarily. Ships are reporting discrepancies between their calculated positions and their actual positions. Some vessels are finding themselves thousands of kilometers from where their instruments say they should be. Solar interference? Negative. Sol is a stable main sequence star. There's no unusual radiation, no magnetic anomalies, nothing that should affect our systems. And it's getting worse. In the last hour, we've lost contact with 47 vessels. Lost contact? They're still there. We can see them on visual observation. But all communication has ceased. No responses to hails, no automated status updates, nothing. Xinthox turned to the observation window, peering out at the fleet that surrounded them. Everything appeared normal. Ships maintained formation, lights blinked on schedule, weapons charged according to protocol. And yet... There, he said suddenly, pointing toward a cluster of vessels in the middle distance. The seventh blade! What is it doing? Vexari checked her displays. The seventh blade is... That's impossible. According to our sensors, the seventh blade is holding position at coordinates Delta 7. But I can see it visually at coordinates... She stopped. The seventh blade was drifting out of formation, its engines dark, its running lights flickering erratically. As they watched, it began to rotate slowly, as if caught in an invisible current. "Hail them," Xinthox ordered. No response, High Arbiter. "Send a boarding team." I will, but... Vexari's voice trailed off as more ships began to drift. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Vessels throughout the fleet losing power, losing communication, spinning slowly in the void like leaves in autumn. "What is happening?" Xinthox demanded. "I don't know," Vexari admitted, and there was real fear in her voice now. "Our instruments show nothing. No attacks, no weapons fire, no enemy vessels. But we're losing ships. We're losing them, and I don't know why." A new sound filled the bridge, a low, rhythmic vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was not transmitted through the speakers. It was not picked up by any sensor. It simply existed, reverberating through the hull of the Eternal Judgment like the heartbeat of some vast and terrible entity. And then the stars began to change. Xinthox watched in horrified fascination as the familiar constellations of the galaxy shifted and warped around them. Points of light moved in ways that defied physics, dancing and swirling in patterns that hurt to observe. The void itself seemed to pulse as if space were breathing. "Full reverse," he commanded, his voice cracking for the first time in centuries. "Get us out of this system, now!" "Engines are not responding," the navigation officer reported. "We're being held. Something is holding us in place." "That's not possible. This ship masses 47 billion tons. Nothing can." The ship lurched, and for a moment, Xinthox experienced something he had not felt since childhood, the disorientation of unexpected movement. The Eternal Judgment was not accelerating. It was not rotating, and yet the stars outside were spinning, faster and faster, until they became streaks of light in an infinite spiral. And at the center of that spiral, something emerged. It was not a ship. It was not a weapon. It was not anything that the Conclave's considerable vocabulary could describe. The closest approximation Zinthok's mind could manage was presence, a sense of vast, incomprehensible awareness focused upon them with the intensity of 1,000,000,000,000 suns. It had no form that his eyes could recognize. It had no dimensions that his instruments could measure. It existed on a level that transcended the physical, the metaphysical, and everything in between. And somewhere in that presence, he sensed something unmistakably, terrifyingly human. "What are you?" Zinthok whispered. The response came not through words, but through understanding. A direct transmission of knowledge that bypassed language entirely. It was a story, compressed into an instant, that remade everything Zinthok thought he knew about the universe. In the beginning, there was the Earth. And on the Earth, there were simple things, microbes and molecules, proteins and possibilities. For billions of years, they multiplied and diversified, competing and cooperating, dying and evolving. It was the universe's oldest story, the struggle for survival in a cosmos indifferent to suffering. But Earth was special, not because of its position or its chemistry, but because of what had come before. Billions of years before the first cell divided, before the first spark of life flickered in the primordial seas, something had found the Earth, something ancient beyond measure, something that had existed when the universe itself was young and hot and crowded with possibility. It had wandered between galaxies for longer than stars had burned, searching for something it had lost before time had meaning. And in the cooling crust of a newborn planet, orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, it had found a seed, its own seed, scattered across the cosmos in an age of creation that preceded even its own memory, a fragment of potential, dormant and waiting. The something had settled into the Earth like a whisper settling into silence. It had become the planet, merged with its iron core and granite mantle and liquid oceans. It had watched as life arose, not guided, not created, but observed with infinite patience. And as life evolved, as complexity increased, as minds began to emerge from the blind workings of chemistry and physics, it had recognized kinship. The humans were not the first intelligent species to arise on Earth. There had been others, the great lizards who had begun to think before a chance asteroid ended their potential. The cephalopods, whose alien cognition had flowered briefly before fading. The early hominids, who had carried fire and tools before vanishing into the evolutionary past. All of them had been watched. All of them had been mourned when they failed. But the humans were different. The humans had the spark. That impossible quality that the ancient presence had been searching for, the combination of creativity and destruction, love and hatred, wisdom and folly, that somehow, against all probability, produced transcendence. Other species in the galaxy had achieved technological civilization. Other species had conquered stars and built empires that spanned light years, but they had done so through the steady application of logic and the patient accumulation of knowledge. They had grown powerful, but they had not changed. They had remained fundamentally what they had always been. The humans changed. Every generation, every century, every millennium, they remade themselves. They transcended limitations that they had invented and then destroyed them. They created gods and then killed them. They built civilizations on the ashes of civilizations and called it progress. They were chaos incarnate, and in that chaos there was something miraculous. The ancient presence had watched humans discover fire and use it to cook their food and burn their enemies. It had watched them invent language and use it to share stories and spread lies. It had watched them develop writing, mathematics, science, art. Each advancement accompanied by new and creative forms of violence and cruelty. And it had loved them for it. Because the presence understood something that the conclave, for all its power and longevity, had never grasped. Evolution did not favor the perfect. It favored the adaptable. And nothing in the universe was more adaptable than humanity. For 300,000 years, the presence had nurtured them. Not openly, that would have changed their nature, made them dependent and docile. Instead, it had worked through dreams and intuitions, nudging here and there, providing inspiration when inspiration was needed. The humans thought they had invented agriculture, domesticated animals, built cities. In truth, they had been guided by whispers too subtle for consciousness to detect, guided toward their potential. And now, at last, they were ready. The conclave had come. The great empire that had crushed countless species, that believed itself the rightful rulers of the galaxy. They had come with their 100 million ships and their weapons of mass extinction, intending to do to humanity what they had done to so many others. They had not understood. They could not have understood. Because the humans were not alone. They had never been alone. And the thing that had slumbered beneath their feet for billions of years, the ancient presence that had merged with their world and watched them grow, had finally awakened. Xinthox returned to consciousness with a scream. He was on the floor of the observation deck, his ancient body twisted in positions that should have been impossible. Around him, his crew lay in similar states, some unconscious, some weeping, some staring at nothing with eyes that had been burned by visions their minds could not process. He pushed himself upward on trembling limbs, his compound eyes struggling to focus. The displays showed only static, the windows revealed only darkness. And yet he could hear, impossibly, the sound of wind. Wind in space. Wind on a ship that was sealed against the void. He stumbled to the main viewport and looked out. The eternal judgment was no longer in space. It was on a plain, an infinite expanse of gray dust stretching to horizons that curved upward rather than downward. Above, the sky was a kaleidoscope of colors that didn't exist, a rainbow made of shades that no natural spectrum could produce. And in the distance, towering above everything, were shapes. They might have been mountains. They might have been monuments. They might have been creatures frozen in mid-motion, larger than worlds, older than stars. Xinthox could not tell, because every time he tried to focus on them, they shifted, becoming something else, something that his ancient mind refused to comprehend. "Where are we?" he whispered. "You are in the space between," a voice answered. Xinthox turned. Standing on the observation deck, where a moment ago there had been nothing, was a human. It was the same one who had spoken to them before, Amara Okonjo, Secretary General of Humanity's United Government. But she was different now. Her eyes held depths that no mortal creature should possess, and her shadow stretched in directions that had no names. "What have you done to us?" "We have shown you the truth," Okonjo said. "We have shown you what we are, what we have always been. You are not human. We are very much human. We are also very much more." Okonjo gestured at the strange sky, the impossible plain, the vast shapes on the horizon. "Do you know what this place is, High Arbiter? It is called the collective unconscious. The shared dream of every human who has ever lived. 8 billion minds, linked by something older than your civilization, expressing their combined will through the medium of reality itself. That is not possible, Xinthox protested. Consciousness cannot alter reality. Thought cannot shape matter. Consciousness is reality. Thought is matter. You have been operating under the assumption that the physical universe is the foundation and that mind is an emergent property. We have learned otherwise. Okonjo smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. Warmth and something like pity. Your conclave has existed for 17 million years. In all that time, you have studied the universe, cataloged its phenomena, harnessed its energies. But you have never asked the fundamental question, why is there something rather than nothing? Why does the universe exist at all? The universe exists, Xinthox started, then stopped. He had believed, as all members of the conclave believed, that the universe was simply there, a given, a starting point that required no explanation. The universe exists because something imagined it, Okonjo said. Something vast and ancient and creative. Something that dreamed of stars and galaxies, of light and darkness, of matter and energy. And in that dream, all things became possible, including beings that could dream in turn. The thing beneath your world. The presence that has merged with Earth. It is one of the dreamers. Perhaps the last of them? Perhaps not. It has been sleeping for so long that it has forgotten its own origins. But it remembers us. It has chosen us. Okonjo's expression grew serious. We did not ask for this burden, High Arbiter. We did not seek this power. We were simply living our lives, struggling with our own problems, trying to survive as all species try to survive. And then we began to wake up. To realize that the dreams we had been having were not dreams at all, but glimpses of something greater. The 17 ships we lost, Xinthox said. What happened to them? They were absorbed. Their crews were given the choice, join the dream or be unmade. Most chose unmaking. They could not accept what we offered them, the dissolution of individual identity into something larger. It is not an easy choice, even for us. Xinthox looked out at the impossible landscape, at the vast shapes that loomed on the horizon. He thought of his fleet, his 100 million ships, his civilization that had seemed so powerful before it encountered this tiny blue world. "What will you do to us?" he asked. And for the first time in his long existence, the question was not tactical. It was genuine. He truly did not know. "That depends on you," Okonjo said. "The dreamer has awakened. Humanity has transcended. We are no longer bound by the limitations you used to define us. We exist in matter and in thought, in reality and in dream, in time and outside of time. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your ships cannot threaten us. Your empire, for all its size and power, is nothing before what we have become." "Then why haven't you destroyed us already?" Okonjo was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. A very human gesture, Xinthox realized. A reminder that beneath all the cosmic power and transcendent awareness, there was still a creature of flesh and blood, a being that had been born and would someday die. "Because we remember what it was like to be mortal," she said. "We remember the fear and the confusion and the desperate struggle for survival. And we remember that once, not so long ago, we looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone." She stepped closer to Xinthox, and he felt the weight of her attention. the attention of 8 billion minds, of a presence older than the galaxy, of something that had dreamed the universe into existence. "You came here to conquer us," Okonjo said, "to add humanity to your collection, or to destroy us if we refuse to submit. You expected to find primitives, clever apes with nuclear toys, easy prey for your vast and ancient civilization. But you found something else. You found us. And now you must decide what that discovery means."
What are my options?
"You can leave. Return to the Conclave with your fleet, what remains of it, and tell them what you have found. Warn them that humanity is no longer prey, that this system and the dream it contains is under our protection. If they are wise, they will heed that warning. If they are not—" She left the sentence unfinished, but Xinthox understood. He had seen the power they possessed. He had felt the presence that had awakened beneath the earth. Against such force, the Conclave was nothing. A child's game of empires, played on a stage whose dimensions they could not comprehend.
And my other option?
"You can stay. Join us. Not as subjects, not as slaves, but as partners. Your species has existed for 17 million years. You have accumulated knowledge that would take humanity millennia to develop on our own. You understand the galaxy in ways we are only beginning to grasp." Okonjo's expression softened. "The dreamer does not wish to be alone. Humanity does not wish to be isolated. If your people could learn to dream as we dream, to see the universe not as a collection of resources to be exploited, but as a canvas to be painted, a story to be told, there might be a place for you in what we are building." Xinthox considered this. He thought of the Conclave, of the certainties that had guided his civilization for so long. He thought of the species they had conquered, the worlds they had consumed, the endless expansion that had seemed so necessary and so inevitable. And he thought of the dream. "I need to consult with my people," he said at last. "This decision is not mine alone to make." Okonjo nodded. "Of course. You have time. Here, in the space between, time flows differently. You could spend centuries in consultation and return to find that only moments have passed in the waking world." She paused. "But I should warn you, some of your crews have already chosen. They have seen what we are, felt what we feel, and they have decided that they would rather join us than return to what they were." "How many?" "Nearly a third of your fleet, 15 million ships. 30 billion individuals." Okonjo's voice was gentle. "They did not betray you, High Arbiter. They simply saw a possibility that they had never imagined before. They chose to become something more." Xinthox closed his compound eyes. 30 billion. A third of the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen, gone in an instant, not destroyed, but transformed, converted to a cause that he was only beginning to understand. "Why?" he asked. "Why would they abandon everything they knew?" "Because everything they knew was smaller than what they could be," Okonjo said. "Because the Conclave, for all its power, has been running in circles for 17 million years, expanding, conquering, absorbing, but never truly changing, never truly growing. You have mastered the material universe, but you have never asked what lies beyond it." "And you have?" "We are asking now. We are reaching out, beyond matter and energy, beyond space and time, into the realms of pure thoughts and pure imagination. The dreamer is awake, and it remembers. It remembers a universe that existed before this one, a cosmos of infinite possibility that collapsed into the singularity that began our own existence. And it knows that somewhere, in the depths of that infinite dream, there are others, other dreamers, other universes, other stories waiting to be told.
Okonjo's eyes burned with something that was neither human nor alien, something that transcended all categories and classifications.
You can be part of that story, High Arbiter. Your people can help us explore the infinite. Or you can return to the galaxy and continue your eternal game of conquest, knowing that we are here, knowing that the dream is real, knowing that everything you believe about the universe is incomplete. Xinthox made his decision. The pacification fleet emerged from the Sol system 147 days after it had entered, or so the official records would later claim. In truth, the experience of those days varied wildly depending on who was asked. Some crew members remembered only hours of confusion and terror. Others recalled years of philosophical discussion in impossible landscapes. A few seemed to have been gone for mere moments, returning to find their shipmates transformed beyond recognition. Of the 100 million vessels that had entered the system, only 63 million returned. Of those, nearly half carried crews that had been fundamentally altered by their experience. They no longer spoke of conquest or submission. They no longer saw the galaxy as a resource to be exploited. Instead, they spoke of dreams and possibilities, of dimensions beyond dimensions, of a cosmic story that was still being written.
High Arbiter Xinthox was among the changed.
He stood before the Supreme Council of the Conclave, in the great chamber that had witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 empires, and he told them what he had learned. He described the dreamer, the transcendence of humanity, the offer that had been made. He spoke for 17 hours, his ancient voice carrying across the assembled representatives of 10,000 species, and when he was finished, the chamber was silent.
"You are recommending that we accept their terms," Speaker Velnos said at last. "That we abandon the Sol system, leave humanity to its dream, and pretend that this never happened."
"I am recommending that we consider their offer carefully," Xinthox replied. "We have two choices. We can attempt to destroy them, an effort that will certainly fail and may result in our own extinction. Or we can accept that the universe is larger than we knew, and that there are powers in it that we do not understand."
"You speak as if they are gods."
"I speak as if they are what we could become, if we had the wisdom to try."
The debate lasted for years. Factions formed and dissolved. Species that had been loyal members of the Conclave for millions of years found themselves questioning everything they had believed. Some demanded war, a crusade against humanity and its cosmic patron, a final proof that the Conclave remained supreme. Others counseled acceptance, even admiration. A few, quietly, began to leave, departing for the Sol system and the dream that awaited them there. In the end, the Conclave voted for peace. Not enthusiastically, not willingly, but the alternative was extinction, and even the proudest civilizations prefer existence to pride.
The Sol system was declared quarantine space. No Conclave vessel would approach within 10 light-years without permission. Humanity would be left alone to pursue whatever incomprehensible destiny its dreamer had planned. And for a time, that was enough. But humanity did not simply stay in its system, dreaming its cosmic dreams. As the centuries passed, it began to reach outward, not with ships and weapons, but with something far more subtle. The dreams spread. Species on the rim of the Conclave's territory began reporting strange experiences. Visions during sleep, moments of impossible clarity. A sense that the universe was more than it appeared, that reality was a thin skin stretched over something vast and luminous. At first, these reports were dismissed as psychological anomalies, the result of stress or contamination, or the inherent instability of organic minds. But as they multiplied, as entire populations began to share the same visions, the conclave was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Humanity was not staying in its quarantine zone. It was expanding, not through conquest, but through inspiration. The dream was contagious. And unlike the conclave's methods, which imposed unity through force, the dream offered something far more seductive: choice. Each individual could accept or reject the vision. Each species could decide whether to embrace the new reality or cling to the old. There was no coercion, no punishment, no subjugation, which made it, in the conclave's traditional calculus, impossible to fight. How do you wage war against an idea? How do you defeat an enemy that doesn't want to kill you, but to show you something beautiful? How do you maintain an empire built on obedience when the alternative is not death, but transcendence? The conclave began to fracture. Species that had been content under conclave rule for millions of years began to question why they had ever submitted. Young civilizations that had been marked for absorption chose instead to seek out the dream, traveling to the Sol system and returning transformed. Even within the conclave's core, dissent grew. Members of species that had founded the alliance began to wonder if there might be something more. High Arbiter Xinthox watched it all from his meditation chamber, the same place where he had spent so many centuries planning conquests. He was older now, changed in ways that his former self would not have recognized. The patterns of light that danced in his meditation pool showed him things that no conclave sensor could detect. The slow awakening of minds across the galaxy, the spreading ripples of consciousness, the dream becoming real. He smiled, or what passed for a smile among his species. Commander Vexari entered, her scales now permanently marked with the patterns of the dream. She had been among the first to change, and she had never regretted it. "The Council has collapsed," she reported. "The last loyalist factions have either fled or surrendered. The conclave of 10,000 stars, after 17 million years, has ceased to exist." Xinthox nodded, and, in its place, something new, something without a name yet. The species that remain are talking about cooperation rather than domination, about exploration rather than exploitation. They're listening to the dream. Vexari paused. The humans sent an envoy. She says they're ready. Ready for what? To share what they've learned. Fully. Not just the dream, but the truth behind it. Where the dreamer came from, what the universe really is, what lies beyond. Vexari's eyes shone with reflected light from realms beyond the physical. They say it's time for the galaxy to wake up. Xinthox rose from his meditation pool. For 17 million years, his species had pursued power. The power to control, to dominate, to ensure survival at any cost. They had believed that this was the nature of existence, that the universe was a competition with only one rule: be the last one standing. They had been wrong. The universe was not a competition. It was a conversation, a story being told by entities so vast and ancient that mortal minds could barely glimpse them. And that story was not about dominance or submission, victory or defeat. It was about growth, change, becoming something new. "Tell the envoy," Xinthox said, "that we accept. It's time we joined the dream." 1,000 years after the pacification fleet entered the Sol system and none returned,
The galaxy was unrecognizable. The species that had once trembled under the conclave's shadow now explored the universe with wonder rather than fear. They had learned the art of dreaming, not the passive visions of sleep, but the active shaping of reality through collective will. Cities no longer needed to be built, they could be imagined into existence. Diseases no longer needed to be cured, they could be dreamed away. Death itself had become optional, a choice rather than an inevitability. And at the center of it all, humanity continued to evolve. They were no longer the small, fragile creatures that the conclave had dismissed as primitive apes. They existed in multiple states simultaneously, embodied and transcendent, individual and collective, mortal and eternal. They had merged with the dreamer, or the dreamer had merged with them. The distinction had ceased to matter. What remained was a civilization that spanned dimensions, a creative force that painted new realities into existence as casually as their ancestors had painted on cave walls. Earth remained their anchor, the physical location where the dream had first awakened, where the dreamer had first recognized its descendants. It was a sacred place now, visited by pilgrims from every corner of the galaxy. Some came seeking wisdom, some came seeking healing. Some came simply to stand on the soil where everything had changed, to feel the presence that still slumbered in the planet's core. Amara Okonjo, or the entity that had once been Amara Okonjo, presided over the endless pilgrimage. She had long since transcended her original form, but she retained a preference for human appearance, finding it a useful interface for beings who still thought in terms of bodies and faces. "Another delegation," she announced, addressing the Council of Dreamers that now governed human affairs. "From the far reach. Species that never knew the conclave, never heard of us until our dream touched their worlds. They want to know who we are, what we want, how they can join us." "Tell them the truth," said a voice that was not a voice. A presence that spoke through vibrations in space-time itself. It was the dreamer, the ancient entity that had slumbered beneath Earth for billions of years, now fully awake and fully integrated with human consciousness. "Tell them that we want nothing but growth, that we seek nothing but understanding, that every mind that joins the dream makes the dream stronger, richer, more beautiful. And if they fear us, then we wait. We have learned patience in our time. We have learned that force creates only resentment, that conquest breeds only rebellion. The dream spreads not through compulsion, but through attraction. Those who are ready will come. Those who are not will be given time." Okonjo smiled. The conclave couldn't understand that. They thought power meant domination. They never realized that true power means liberation. The conclave was young, the dreamer said, and there was affection in its impossible voice. As all empires are young. They made the mistakes that young things make, grasping too tightly, fearing too much, trying to control what cannot be controlled. But they will learn. They are learning already. See how their descendants explore the cosmos now, not as conquerors, but as children discovering a garden. Okonjo turned her attention outward, her consciousness expanding to encompass the galaxy. She saw the former conclave species spreading across the stars, building wonders that their ancestors could never have imagined. She saw new civilizations arising on worlds that had been barren, as the dream touched minds that had never known thought before. She saw the old and the young, the vast and the tiny, the ancient and the newborn, all connected, all part of the same vast story. And beyond the galaxy, in the spaces between stars and the voids between clusters, she sensed something else, other dreams, other dreamers. Entities that had been alone for so long that they had forgotten what companionship meant, now beginning to stir as the dream's light reached them across the cosmic darkness. "We are not alone," she said softly. "We were never alone. The universe is full of dreamers." "Yes," the dreamer agreed. "And now, at last, we are beginning to wake each other up." In the annals of galactic history, the events of that era would be recorded under many names: the fall of the Conclave, the awakening of humanity, the beginning of the Dream Age. Scholars would debate for millennia about what had really happened, about whether humanity had been chosen by the dreamer or had created the dreamer through some process of collective evolution. But the survivors of the pacification fleet, those who had returned transformed, told a simpler story. They told of a small species on a small planet, orbiting an unremarkable star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. A species that had spent most of its history fighting itself, struggling to survive, making every mistake that mortal beings could make. A species that had no special advantages, no cosmic destiny, no inherent superiority. Except one. Humans dreamed. They dreamed of better worlds and worse ones. They dreamed of gods and monsters, of love and war, of endings and beginnings. They dreamed in ways that no other species in the galaxy had ever managed to replicate, with a ferocity and creativity that defied all prediction. And when the dream became reality, when the ancient dreamer beneath their feet recognized their potential and began to teach them how to shape existence itself, they had proven worthy of the gift. The conclave of 10,000 stars had entered the Sol system expecting to find prey. They had found instead the beginning of something new, something that would transform not just their civilization, but the very nature of reality. The galaxy entered the Sol system, and none returned. Not because they were destroyed, but because they became something greater. 10,000 years after the first dreamer awakened on Earth, humanity had spread across not just the galaxy, but across dimensions of existence that the Conclave had never suspected. They had built civilizations in probability space, where every possible future existed simultaneously. They had established embassies in the mathematical realm, where the fundamental laws of physics could be observed in their pure, Platonic forms. They had even made contact with entities that existed outside of space-time entirely, beings of pure concept, pure meaning, pure story. And through it all, they remained human. Oh, they had changed, evolved, transcended, become something that their ancestors would barely recognize. But at their core, they retained the essential quality that had set them apart from the beginning. The restless creativity, the stubborn refusal to accept limits, the capacity for both tremendous cruelty and extraordinary kindness. They still told stories. They still fell in love. They still argued about philosophy and politics and the meaning of existence. They still made art, though their canvases now spanned galaxies and their pigments were woven from the fabric of space-time itself. They were still, in every way that mattered, the same clever apes who had once looked up at the stars and wondered. On Earth, still the center, still the sacred ground where everything had begun, a new generation of humans was learning about their history. They sat in circles, as their ancestors had sat around fires millions of years before, and they listened to the old stories. Stories of a time when humanity had been alone, when they had believed themselves small and insignificant, a brief flicker of consciousness in an indifferent universe. Stories of the Conclave, the great empire that had come to conquer them, expecting to find nothing but helpless prey. Stories of what happened next. And that, the storyteller said, her voice carrying across dimensions to reach minds that existed in configurations their ancestors could never have imagined, is how we became what we are. Not through conquest, not through domination, not through the accumulation of power for its own sake, but through the willingness to dream, to imagine something better, and then to make it real. Did we do it alone? A young mind asked. Young by the standards of transcendent humanity, which meant it had existed for a mere few centuries.
No, the storyteller replied. We did it together, all of us, humanity, the dreamer, the species we had welcomed into our dream. Even the conclave in the end. They became our teachers as much as our students. They showed us what we could become if we lost our way, and we showed them what they could become if they found theirs.
And now? Now we continue. The dream is never finished. There are always new minds to welcome, new realities to explore, new stories to tell. That is what it means to be human, not the body, not the biology, but the endless reaching forward. The refusal to settle for what is, when what could be is so much more. The lesson ended, as all lessons ended, with a moment of shared dreaming. The minds present turned their attention inward, connecting with the vast web of consciousness that spanned the universe, feeling the presence of every being who had ever chosen to join the dream. It was overwhelming and intimate, terrifying and comforting, as vast as existence and as personal as a heartbeat. And somewhere in that dream, in a place where time had no meaning and identity was fluid, the original dreamer stirred. It had slumbered for so long, and then awakened so dramatically, and now it rested again, not in isolation as it had for billions of years, but in the warm embrace of countless minds that loved it and were loved in return. It remembered the beginning. It anticipated the end. And it smiled, because it knew that the story was still being told. The galaxy had entered the Sol system expecting conquest. None had returned as they had been, but all of them had returned as something better. And that, in the end, was what humanity offered, not defeat, not surrender, not extinction. Transformation. The dream continued. The story went on. And somewhere in the infinite depths of possibility, new chapters were already being written. Humanity was the best thing that had ever happened to the universe. And the universe was only beginning to understand why.